Well, thank you everyone for coming out tonight, and thank you to Isabel for organizing things here and for that introduction. It's always a pleasure to come and visit Amelia Island. I was here 3 years ago in December of 2021, and it's great to be back. I actually would come here with my family when I was a teenager. In maybe 2, maybe 3 years, we went to Amelia Island Plantation. So it's, who would have known 30 years ago that I would be back here lecturing about history. What a wonderful career it's turned out to be for me. Here, I'm especially happy to be at a place where the American Revolution was fought. Who needs Boston? Or Philadelphia? Or Virginia? Or any of those places? We can't let them hog all of the attention for the upcoming 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. We need to claim our status here in Florida as a place where the American Revolution happened too. And that's what I would like to talk about today. Britain's loyal colonies, East and West Florida, how they were lost, and the larger story of the American Revolution here in Florida. So, overview for the plan today, our plan. First, I'll talk about just what was British Florida. I mentioned already that there were 2 British Floridas. East Florida, where we are, I think it's the best one. And West Florida, okay? Those losers in the panhandle. So East and West Florida. I'll also try to explain why those 2 colonies remained loyal, where the 13 to the north rebelled. That's one of the things that needs explanation. Then I'll talk about East Florida and West Florida and their different experiences. There are 3 invasions of East Florida by the Patriot forces. None of them go especially well. Right? There's St. Augustine, Thomas Creek. There's a battle at Thomas Creek, and Alligator Creek Bridge. Does anyone know where Thomas Creek or Alligator Creek are? No. Okay, you get one person there. Hey, if there are more resounding successes for the Americans, we know what they are. So that's East Florida. Then I'll talk about 3 conquests of West Florida. These were done by the Spanish. So first I'll need to talk a little bit about why Spain is assisting the United States in its war against Britain. Then these are more successful for the American side. The Spanish really carrying this out. There's an attack on Baton Rouge, an attack on Mobile, and then finally culminating in an attack on Pensacola, the capital of West Florida. Okay. This gentleman here, this is a statue that's been recently erected to Bernardo de Galvez, the leader of the Spanish forces who was attacking British West Florida. Okay. That's in downtown Pensacola. All right, so first of all, what is British Florida? British Florida, right, you see on the map there, British Florida was territory that was gained for Britain during the 7 Years' War, or also called the French and Indian War, for its North American theater. And in that larger war, which is engulfing all of Europe and its colonies, Spain gives up its claim to the Floridas to Britain in exchange for Havana. So Britain had captured Havana, Spain wants that one back, so they trade all of the Floridas for Havana. It gives you an idea of our relative importance to over 250 years ago. It's true. We're not that important back then. Havana is really the port that they really need. The British took that territory, which the Spanish had called all of it Florida, and they divided it into 2 provinces. Okay, so 2 colonies, East and West Florida. East Florida has the capital at St. Augustine, okay, and West Florida has its capital at Pensacola. So really, the settlement. Okay, I issued my pointing stick here. So of course, make sure not to damage the TV. That would be bad. St. Augustine, of course, here, right? Pensacola's over in here. Really, the settlement is up here, along the I-10 corridor. So basically this is I-10 is where the European settlement is. Not much European settlement down here. Native Americans live down here, but not many Europeans. Florida, in case you're not aware, Florida's pattern, its settlement pattern is north, then south, then the middle. Okay? Really? Tampa a little bit earlier, okay, but really north, south, and the middle. And where I'm from in Orlando, it's post-1971. It's really, they're the big surges. Okay, so that is, that's the settlement pattern in Florida. West Florida includes not only the Panhandle, okay, but also Florida's Panhandle, but also into Mobile. This is Mobile Bay here. So part of Alabama, part of Mississippi, and part of Louisiana, all the way to the Mississippi River. Okay, so it goes from the Apalachicola River, that's the border between East and West Florida, and then Apalachicola River to the Mississippi is West Florida. Okay, so that's the dividing line there. And that is where the division between the Eastern time zone and the Central time zone is in Florida today. So a fun fact, if you're traveling to Destin, you can entertain everyone by giving them the history of the border with East and West Florida. It's going to be a great spring break, isn't it? The people who live in the Floridas. So East Florida's population is about 4,000 in 1775, on the eve of the American Revolution. That's the non-native population. Estimates of the native population are very difficult to come by. About 2,000 of that 4,000 number is enslaved people. Okay, so about half and half. And, a guess is 2,000 natives, okay, a guess. So that's the Florida population. Again, that's not very many people. You add all that up. Not very many people living in East Florida. West Florida is probably is actually the larger of the two population-wise, even though it's the smaller of the two territory-wise. So again, in 1774, about 4,900 non-native. Of those, about 1,200 enslaved people, and maybe 50,000 natives. It's a much larger native population in West Florida. An important point is to compare the Floridas to the other North American colonies. It's much smaller than the colonies that joined the American Revolution. So Virginia is the largest of the 13, at about 500,000 people as the American Revolution is beginning. Georgia is the smallest at 40,000 population, but even that is, it dwarfs the size of the European population in either of those places. So the Florida's population is much, much smaller than even the smallest of the 13 colonies that joined the American Rebellion. And that's going to affect everything in the larger story. It's the smaller population there. Why did the Floridas stay loyal to King George? Now, the Americans who are rebelling, they would have been happy to have the Floridas join the American Revolution. There are invitations that were made, but there's no real revolutionary movement within the Floridas. They reject any invitation to join the rebellion. It's not something they're interested in. Some reasons why in Florida they're not interested in rebelling against British rule. One category of reasons could go under the heading of they just experienced the same events that were making colonists in other places and really angry. In Florida, those same events were just experienced differently. They hit differently and did not make people as angry as they did in other colonies. So a great example of this is the Proclamation of 1763. This was a proclamation by the king that followed from the end of the French and Indian War. And it was an attempt by the British to separate Anglo colonists from Native Americans. The British authorities knew that wherever Americans or American colonists, wherever they moved west and came in contact with Indians, violence was sure to follow because of the contest over that land. And the British, they don't care if colonists have all the land they want. They want peace, because if there's war and violence, then they have to do something about it. They have to send troops over to keep the peace, and that costs money and manpower. They just want to keep the sides separate, just don't fight with each other. So they draw a line on the map that limits the movement west, okay, of people in all these colonies here. So especially like in Virginia, where there's a strong movement to try and go west, in Pennsylvania, okay, not so much in New York, but Pennsylvania, Virginia, the Carolinas here, they all want to move and settle across the Appalachian Mountains. This is the mountains roughly run along here, okay? So they're really angry about being restricted, their movements. We said we thought winning the war was about getting us more land. Okay? In the Floridas, the British are actually trying to encourage movement south to the Floridas. So you see the line ends here. It doesn't include East and West Florida. That's because they're trying to encourage people to move down to the Floridas. Okay? So the British plan is that they'll limit movement west and kind of push people up to Canada or down to the Floridas. Okay? So stay away from the native territory out here. There's more land down here, more land up there. Okay? That's the kind of plan that the British authorities have. Well, that benefits Florida by encouraging a larger population to the Floridas. So where people in Virginia are angry, people in the Floridas think, okay, yes, this is a good British policy. This is going to boost our population. So a great example of how the same policy has different effects depending on what colony you're in. Another factor in why the Floridas remain loyal to Britain's distance is a really obvious factor. They're just further away from the others. It's hard to coordinate with them, hard to travel, hard to get messages there. In the Continental Congress, Georgia's delegates are absent for long stretches of time, to the point where in the Continental Congress they really don't even expect Georgia to be represented anymore. There are things that are supposed to have the unanimous vote of all 13 states, but they kind of make a gentleman's agreement that it's really 12 because Georgia won't be here. Right? You can imagine Florida is going to be even worse, right? Especially West Florida is going to be even worse for attending. Okay? So just the distance is a major barrier. People who live in Florida, they know that they need Britain to survive. People in New York, you know people from New York City, right? We're the center of the universe. We don't need anybody else. It was that way in the 18th century too. So, but people in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, they think they can go it on their own. People in Florida know they need help. And it's actually, the empire is a good deal for them. So all those taxes that are being paid by colonists, that colonists resent like crazy, the Floridas are a net beneficiary of that. So they pay less to Britain than they get in services, especially military services, defense from their enemies like France and Spain. Okay? So they're winners in this system. Boston, for example, thinks they're losers. By losing, they're getting more taken out. In Florida, they know that they cannot survive on their own, and it's actually a good deal to be taxed because they're actually getting more services than they pay for. Okay? There's no newspaper published until the 1780s in either of the Floridas. If you know anything about the American Revolution, you know what important role newspapers play in fomenting discontent, spreading information, coordinating activities. There's just not printed. There is no newspaper in the same era in the Floridas. East Florida does not have its own legislature. West Florida does, but East Florida doesn't. So there's no body of colonists to mount any kind of official resistance to British policy, the way there is in Boston or in New York or in Philadelphia. In East Florida, the royal governor rules directly without a legislature of any kind. There's also an awareness, and the people in the Floridas, they know how this game is likely to end. It's likely to end with the Patriots losing. So why on earth are you going to back the losing side? Okay. And that's really the rational analysis in 1776, is that the British are going to win this thing. So why join the losing side? And even if the Patriots were to win, people in Florida are aware that if Spain is helping the United States is probably going to give Florida to the Spanish. Okay. And that's going to mean a lot of uncertainty. Okay. They like the British system the way it is because it's predictable and it's giving them enough of what they need to be happy. Okay. So even if the Americans win, it's going to be bad for the people in Florida. They're going to lose that one. All right, so the three invasions of East Florida. The early conflict in 1775 is a lot of kind of sort of small raids back and forth across the border from Georgia into the Floridas. A lot of cattle theft. So you thought like cowboys were like cattle rustlers? No, the Spanish brought cattle, and it goes way back into the colonial period. It's a lot of stealing cattle, stealing enslaved people. So on both sides, they'll go over to the enemy's plantation, right? Take their livestock, grab the enslaved people, and bring them back to their plantation or sell them off. Okay, so kind of low scale conflicts, small raiding parties on both sides. Burning plantations. Okay, so that kind of not a formal battle, but that kind of conflict back and forth, kind of low scale, rolling, ongoing throughout 1775. Because of that, the conflict that's going on in the colonies to the north, places especially like Georgia and the Carolinas, where there's similar conflict between loyalists and patriots, there are loyalists who are moving to Florida to try and escape from the violence, right? If you have your plantation burned in South Carolina burned, you're going to try and go someplace else. That someplace else is sometimes Florida. And the governor of the Floridas, the two governors of the Floridas, they provide incentives. So they'll give land grants. They have a lot of land to give away to a small number of people. So they give away land, right? Restart your life in Florida. You can have your own land here. Also, they will give they'll give no taxes for 10 years. So come here, get land, you don't have to pay tax on it for 10 years. So that's a pretty good deal to relocate to Florida. And that's something that's happening over time. In 1776, the Continental Congress decides that they would like to have an attack on St. Augustine, the British capital of East Florida. Their thinking is that they want to be able to protect Georgia, so to stop the cross-border raids into Georgia. So this is about providing security for Georgia. They figure that capturing St. Augustine will weaken the British protection for its shipping. Okay. Let me show you. I got a map here. Okay, so you see this map here. The typical shipping pattern is you can't go from any of the Caribbean ports here, like Jamaica down here, British port. You can't go straight back to England over here. You have to go up, okay, up the Gulf of the Florida Channel here, the Straits of Florida, with Florida on one side, the Bahamas on the other. This is shallow water here, and of course, you'll wreck on this, and of course, if you sail over here, you'll wreck over here too. Okay? That's why, like the treasure coast, it's called there. The shipwrecks, right, and spill the treasure. So St. Augustine was founded by the Spanish to support protection of their ships coming through here. Okay? Now the British have it so they can protect their ships moving through here, and the Continental Congress figures that if they control this here too, they'll be able to disrupt any kind of British shipping moving through this channel here. Okay, so they're thinking strategically about the geography of the area. Finally, they would like to close off those escape routes for the Loyalists. So letting them get away only allows them to grow stronger in the future. So close that off, force them to deal with the Patriots close by to them, okay, keep the pressure on. So that's the American thinking. Okay, in order to do that, so the Continental Congress wants this done. The Army decides, all right, how are we going to do this? Here's the plan, and the problems with the plan the Army comes up with. So really, there's only one way to march from Georgia to St. Augustine, and that's along what's called the King's Road. Okay, so this is the King's Road, 1839 map, so after our period. But someone has, I found this online very, very helpfully, has drawn a red line here depicting the King's Road. There's a kind of spur of this out from about here or so, up here, out to Amelia Island then. Okay, so there's a road there. I don't know what modern road this traces here, right? Because 95 is like here. There's probably some road that does it, because once you cut one road in an advantageous place, right, you keep using it over and over again. So that's the way to march. The problem, of course, is that the British know that's the way to march. And if you want to try and get around the British, well, on either side is basically swamps. I was driving in here today, of course, there's all kinds of new development, right? When they're clearing out that land, the first step is to clear out the land, and put the pipes underneath and everything. Before that, though, it's just like swamps and trees and stuff, and you can't really walk through there very efficiently. So it's either wade through the swamps, which is nobody wants to do, or go along a completely predictable route where the British can attack you. Okay. There are two major water crossings, like out here. Okay, that's the biggest one around Jacksonville. All right, there's the nice bridge that goes over there today. The British can just sit there and wait and attack you as you try to go across the river. I mean, you can't go through the river either. So they know this, and that's going to be very difficult to traverse that road when it can be so easily defended. Assuming, let's just assume for the sake of argument, that the American forces are able to get down that road effectively. In order to attack St. Augustine, they're going to need to lay siege to it, because there's a fort. Laying siege in this period would involve the attackers would start digging trenches around the fortification. And then they would dig what's called a parallel. So dig right along like this. Then they would kind of zigzag a smaller thing, and then start building another one closer. And they dig it deep enough that the men in the fort can't shoot down on them. So they're protected by the earthworks above them. Okay, then once they get close enough, they can put their heavy guns in place and then just pound the fort until it surrenders. The way siege works is that ideally the besiegers, the attackers, will be able to get inside faster than the fort can get reinforcements. So that's the game. Can the attackers go fast enough, or will the defenders get reinforced? Do they have enough supplies to hold out until they're reinforced? Okay, so that's the game they're playing. I was once asked a wonderful question. I was asked, like, they're digging by hand? How do they really do that? Right? I mean, think about it. They're going to dig? How do they do that? The answer is that young men in large numbers can do amazing things. That's really what it is. Okay? They get several hundred, 19 and 20-year-olds. They can work 12 hours a day in the heat. Okay? Not me anymore. I can't do that. But they can. They can do amazing things if you give them the chance. Okay, so they're going to lay siege to St. Augustine. To do this, you need siege guns, the heavy artillery. Good luck getting that through the swamps and along the road. You're also going to need to blockade St. Augustine so that the British can't resupply it. Good luck doing that against the large and very effective British Navy. And finally, you're going to need resupplies to keep the siege going. And good luck doing that, again, along the road where the British know you're coming, the easily ambushed road. So on paper, this is not sounding promising. And in fact, that's one of the major problems, is it never really gets underway. There are Georgia militia. They make the first strike, and they capture Amelia Island. So Georgia militia capture Amelia Island in 1776. And they control kind of North Florida here to the St. Johns River. Okay, so they control up here. Moving on from that with the regular army, so the regular army, not the Georgia militia, the regular forces, getting them moving is very difficult. They're under the command of General Charles Lee, and he is in Charleston, and he dithers there. He doesn't move out very expeditiously. He waits and waits, because he doesn't want to do this. He's just going to get guys killed. Eventually, he gets to Savannah, from Charleston, Savannah. It's taken him all summer to do this. He arrives on August 7th. In the same time in Philadelphia, the Continental Congress has made a decision to reassign him to one of the northern theaters of the war. So he finally gets moving, and he's recalled to go someplace else. Command is given to William Moultrie. If you know South Carolina in the American Revolution, you may know that name. It's his family, William Moultrie. He's given command, and he calls the whole thing off. Right? Like, forget this. Okay? It was taking too long. There's been rampant desertion, disease. His force is thin from when he first started. This is not going to work. So he calls it all off. The bulk of the army never left Georgia. That's as far as they got. Some Georgia militiamen captured Amelia Island, but the rest of the force is not coming. So they have to give it back and go back to Georgia. So ends the first invasion of East Florida. The second invasion of East Florida culminates at the Battle of Thomas Creek. So this is on a modern map, right? If you go west along 200, it's around in here, okay, in that area there. This time the plan is for a land-sea operation. So 400 men are going to move by sea under the command of a Colonel Samuel Albert, and they're going to link up with 109 mounted militia, so riding horses, led by overland by Colonel John Baker. They're going to rendezvous, right, come together, and then they're going to attack the British. Okay. Baker reaches the rendezvous point, okay, but there is no Colonel Albert. Where are you? They're attacked by natives. They kind of fend that off, but it's very clear they can't stay wherever they are. It's not defensible. They fall back to Thomas Creek, which would have been, around here. They fall back to there as semi-defensible because of the river behind them. It's not vulnerable on four sides. But this is just not going to last very long if the Colonel Albert's forces don't show up sometime soon. Well, he doesn't show up in time. The camp is attacked by the British, and as the soldiers are fleeing, they're driven to a blocking force of men wielding bayonets. In the 18th century, a bayonet is a really gruesome weapon. Today, a bayonet is more like a knife that's fixed to the end of the musket. In the 18th century, a bayonet is it's of a long triangular shape to it, and it's not a cutting or stabbing weapon. It's really a puncturing weapon. You have to get a lot of force behind it to punch a hole in the other guy. And the triangular shape does what? Can you figure out what does it do? Rips them apart and leaves a wound that cannot be healed very easily. So if it don't pierce your liver right away, you'll die agonizingly of infection and gangrene over the next 2 weeks. They're really gruesome. They tell you to shout when you bayonet the guy, in part to steal, get yourself pumped up, but also to cover the awful sound of it going into the Was that one too many bayonet stories? Okay. I have more if anybody wants to. We'll stop there. Okay. That's decide to stop with the bayonet stories. Meanwhile, at sea, the force under Colonel Albert lands at Amelia Island, successfully takes control of it, but they cannot move across the river. That's what's held them up. The British establish an artillery position there, and they prevent the American force from moving across the river. Right, the little bridge that has some nice townhouses built on it by now, and you come over here, they can't get across that because the British are just control that area. So they give up and they abandon Amelia. And so Amelia was conquered twice and abandoned twice. One more time in 1778, the British had continued raiding into Georgia. It's still not secure. So the Continental Congress wants to try this again. This time the Americans, they march south. Again, they march south. And along the way, they're harassed by British militia. So the East Florida Rangers. The East Florida Rangers are harassing them. So a loyalist militia force raised in East Florida. They're led by a man who was originally a planter in South Carolina, who had his plantation burned. I think he suffered terrible burns in the fight at a old house. He moved to Florida and then swore revenge against the Americans. So that's what he's leading here. The British had dug in an Alligator Creek Bridge. Is there a more Florida name than Alligator Creek Bridge? Maybe Orange Creek Bridge. Roughly here in Callahan. Okay. I was conflicted driving up 95. It was east to come over here to Yulee and west to go to Callahan. I'm like, I should go see Callahan. But I should go over there. Maybe on the way home tomorrow. So the British are dug in there at Alligator Creek Bridge. This is where the road splits to Amelia Island. So they'll go down to St. Augustine this way and over to Amelia Island this way. Okay, so that's, right, this is an important juncture there. Okay. When the Americans show up, there's chaos at the bridge. So the Americans are chasing the Rangers. They got them on the run towards the bridge. Then the British who are defending the bridge, they open fire on everybody. All they see are a bunch of men, riding at full speed towards them. And nobody has uniforms. They all have just their hunting shirts or whatever. And as far as the guys at the bridge know, these are Americans come to attack them. So they just shoot at everyone. Eventually, they realize what they're doing is firing on their own side. They stop that. Then the Americans show up in hot pursuit and they get fired upon by the British. So they fall back to regroup. As they're regrouping, the Rangers are then able to outflank the Americans. Right? And then the Americans are attacked on two sides, from the bridge and from the Rangers. And they're mopped up pretty quickly then. So another failed attack there. Okay. After Alligator Creek, so the aftermath of this, the Americans give up their idea of invading. They say, General Lincoln, who's in charge of the Southern Department there, he writes to General Washington, says, "It would be embarrassing and unsafe to attempt an expedition against the province of East Florida." Would be. It already has been embarrassing and unsafe to do this. Okay. The British are able to turn the tables. They capture Savannah in December with elements of the East Florida, the Florida Rangers supporting that. So Britain has expanded. They've won back territory in Georgia. East Florida is then safe from American attack. Trade picks up. The population is growing. Up to 17,000 in 1783 as the war's ending. They eventually have their own popularly elected assembly. So things are going pretty well for British East Florida. Until peace. Because peace is a disaster for East Florida, the British in East Florida. Because the Spanish do, in fact, get East Florida at the peace treaty. That means Spain takes over in 1784. And they're going to give that land to Spaniards. People who support the Crown of Spain. And many of the British loyalists are forced to evacuate. So in East Florida, they experience the American defeat as a kind of blossoming, perhaps, of their community. And the peace treaty is a disaster for them that forces them out of their homes. Now I'd like to talk about West Florida. This is a little more orderly here as the Spanish are able to march from one place to another. First of all, briefly, why Spain joins the American Revolution. So Spain declared war on Britain in 1779. They formally joined the war in 1779. Spain is never an ally of the United States formally, but they are an ally of France, which is an ally of the United States. And all three, the United States, France, and Spain, are enemies of Britain. So what's the enemy of my enemy is my friend? Okay. Right. So effectively, they're on the same side, even if they're not formal allies with the United States. Okay. So that's the motivation there. And really, Spain wants to try and get some of its territory back that it lost in the French and Indian War, and also to diminish the power of Britain as a competitor, great power in Europe. So that's their goal. Oh, I should mention, what they really, really want at the top of their list is Gibraltar back in the Mediterranean. They want that more than they want, any of this American stuff. They want Gibraltar back, because that's held by the British. It didn't work out for them. Number one target is Baton Rouge. So Baton Rouge is on the Florida side of the river. Okay, so that's British territory. This is Spain, this is Britain. That's the Mississippi River. They start marching north under the command of Bernardo de Galvez, the governor of Spanish Louisiana. They start marching north in September 1779. And if you can know anything about conditions in the Gulf of Mexico in September, this is hurricane season. So they start marching and they are delayed by a hurricane. They regroup and then they march north. Galvez has kind of a hodgepodge force here. He has some regular Spanish soldiers. He has militia from Louisiana. He has, including in the militia from Louisiana, are free men of color. He has some people of Irish descent who settled in Spain and now in the Spanish colonies, and a couple of Americans. So all different backgrounds. They march north here. This is a modern artist rendering of what this looks like on their way through the swamps. Okay? I love this painting. This is great. Okay. This is Galvez here looking heroic on his horse that's on a barge. I like this native guy here. Come on, guys. Really? Really? And I like the guy with the drums. March on your own for a while. Forget this. Let's put it on my shoulders. Drums. You gotta have drums. First, they lay siege to an old French and Indian War fort called Fort Butte. They will take that quickly, and then they lay siege to Baton Rouge, and they take that also. Okay? So far, Target 1 has been defeated in the September of 1779. Okay, so that's number 1. Okay. Target 2, the next spring, is Mobile. The plan of attack here is to enter Mobile Bay. So they push past the yellow is Spanish. So they push past some British defenses here into Mobile Bay. If you've ever been to Mobile, this is really wide over here. This is miles and miles across here. Okay? So that's really big. So they sail in here, get through the mouth here, which defend a little bit. They land up here, and then they start digging. As I mentioned before, young men in large numbers, working hard, can do amazing things. And they dig up towards the British fort in Mobile is Fort Charlotte. That's defending the city of Mobile. It's still there. Actually, I don't know if it's the real one or if it's a replica that was rebuilt. I can't remember which one it is. They start laying siege. Now, a British relief force is on the way from Pensacola. They get to here, and they get there at night, and they're going to go relieve and lift the siege the next day. All they have to do is float down the creek there, and they're at their target. But the men in the relief force, they wake up, they're woken up by the sound of, and guess what? Hurricane. Not the hurricane, no. No, it's January, March. March. What are they woken up by? Cannon blasts. All right, the siege gun. They know the siege guns, the ones in the final stage that you open up with to attack. That are like, uh-oh. We shouldn't have stopped for a snack on the way. We could have gone there early. Yeah, so they know that's it. And Fort Charlotte surrenders. The British do try to retake again, but the Spanish defeat them at a place that's now called Spanish Fort because the Spanish built a fort. So then that's phase number 2. The Spanish have conquered that chunk of West Florida. Finally, the main event, target number 3, Pensacola, in the spring of the next year. So Pensacola is the capital, and if the Spanish can capture the capital, then they will have captured all of West Florida. Difficult to get into Pensacola. So not that bay like in Mobile, but the British, you have to go through here. This is your access point into the Pensacola Bay. This is the city itself, and it's well defended here. There are gun emplacements over here, gun emplacements over here on Santa Rosa Island. So theoretically, you can control access with guns in both of those places. Okay, so Perdido Key, okay, Santa Rosa Island Inlet, right in there. That's where the batteries are. Okay. Protecting the city, there's a fort, and there's also 2 redoubts. A redoubt is like a cannon emplacement that is behind and above Pensacola. This is actually, there's a little bit of a hill here. Right? Oddly for Florida, they're actually hills. And this is on higher, so this is higher up than the waterfront, and the redoubts are back here above, so they can project their fire down below. To get in there, the Navy, there's a combined Army and Naval force. Okay? And the Navy commanders, they don't want to go in there because they're very rationally afraid of being destroyed when they try to push into Pensacola Bay. The commander Galvez orders them to go in. The Navy guys say, you're not our general. We're Navy. We're not going to do it. So then Galvez, he inspires his men, and he tells them, whoever has honor and courage, follow me. Okay, he's going to push his way in there and show that you can do it. Later, this dramatic moment is made even more dramatic in the way that Galvez recalls the moment. He then changes, he edits his performance there, his words, to be this. He says, writing about it later, he says, I, my sons, went alone to sacrifice myself, so as not to expose a single soldier. That then is polished even further in his report to the king, where he says, I alone, yo solo. And then that becomes his motto, puts it on his coat of arms. And that's the famous saying that he's associated with ever after. That statue that I showed before, right? It's saying yo solo at the bottom. So if you're going to be known by one line, that's a good one. That's a good one. But notice here he says, I alone. He didn't sail the ship himself. Right? He didn't like, hundreds of other men on the ship too. And he's telling them, I went alone.
He looks guilty.
Oh, his eyes do look shifty there. Not me, he said it was all alone. Oh, 1-4. Okay. So they make it through. He actually does prove that you can make it through without being sunk. Okay. That must have been really annoying to the naval commanders. The guy was bright. They land, they regroup here, get everything. Then they sail up here, they land here, and then they dig. Okay? Like 7 dwarves. But not looking for jewels. They are digging their parallels that they can open up fire on Pensacola. As they have begun firing at Pensacola, there is just a stroke of luck. A cannon blast, a cannonball, gets into the powder magazine at the Queen's Redoubt. They're named King's Redoubt and Queen's Redoubt. Gets in with the gunpowder. Well, you know what's going to happen next. A really big explosion. So supposedly, this is an artist rendering of it. Supposedly Galvez is having breakfast that morning, and everybody hears a way bigger explosion that should come from any cannon. They know what that means. They get everybody ready and go now, right? To storm the fort. They storm the fort, and then the British surrender. Okay? So they don't fight to the last man. They surrender in advance. That brings us to the end of my lecture here today. I want to emphasize that by capturing Pensacola, what the Spanish have done for the American Revolution is they have recaptured a territory. So Britain has lost a colony that did not rebel. Okay? So not only are they failing to recapture those 13 rebellious colonies, now they've lost one to the other side. They're losing loyal colonies. And this is in April of 1781, or May of 1781. In October of 1781 is the surrender at Yorktown. So there are 2 major surrenders of British forces in 1781. We remember Yorktown as we should. That was the more important one. But it was previewed or it was even more significant, more of a blow because another major surrender had happened earlier in the year. That brings me to the end here. This is my contact information. I'm really looking forward to answering questions. But if anything comes up tonight as you're drifting off to sleep, you can you can contact me here.
Maybe so.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Yes.
I had a couple of quick points. At the very beginning, you showed that demarcation line. From what I've read, a lot of the legislators of the colonies had already gone way past that line and surveyed that and invested a lot of money to sell land over there. So that was a major reason why they were so angry about it, is because a lot of our founding fathers were Daniel Boone.
Right, but they're not waiting for approval. They're going and doing it. They're going and doing it. And then any work they've done is going to be declared null and void, and who owns what is going to be a big mess. Also, I've always pointed this out to students. There is no line on a map. Right? Their maps are not great, and there's no line anyway. And who's going to go there and say, oh, who's going to be the line police? You just move out there and dare somebody to stop you.
The other thing was, just real quick, you alluded to it, but you really pointed out, I thought, importantly enough, and that is because of Spanish and British policies towards slavery, the colonies, especially Georgia and South Carolina, lost a lot of enslaved people going into Florida.
Right, yes. So Florida attracts a lot of runaway slaves from Georgia and the Carolinas. That had been a source of tension between those colonies when there was British and Spanish, different empires. But that had been a source of tension going back into the 18th century for a long time. Yeah. Yes?
Wasn't the mindset of the British Floridian vastly different, say, than Massachusetts, which had a history of going back to the Winthrop fleet of being, anti-crown, versus people in Florida where I read this, they were rewarded land instead of cash, because King George was out of cash, so they gained land in Florida instead. So they were predisposed to want to stay loyal to the.
Right. So there's definitely a selection effect. So the people who came to New England, they have a different background, different mentality. Many of them have been there much longer than the British who settle in Florida. And you're right. The British who settle in Florida are they know that they owe the crown something, right? Whereas people have lived, their families have lived in New England for 100 and some years, 150 years by that point. This is our place. We should be able to run and make our own rules here. So yes, you're right. Very different mentalities and very different populations, even though they're both British ancestry. Yes.
So you finished with Spain controlling West Florida and British still controlling East Florida. Could you just quickly summarize what happened?
Yes, so the British hold on to East Florida until the treaty negotiations, the Treaty of Paris, that settles the whole war, where the United States makes peace with Britain and France, and all the different parties make peace with each other. And then as part of that, Spain gets West Florida, which they've taken by conquest, and they get East Florida as part of the treaty. Okay? The British give that up. And again, as I mentioned in passing, the Spanish, they really wanted Gibraltar. They would have traded all of Florida for Gibraltar. The British aren't going to do that trade. Well, I'll give you Florida. Just you deal with it.
But it is a good deal for Spanish because they kept Cuba and they were able to keep all the routes from commerce from South America
Right.
and the Antilles and all that.
Right, so yes, I mean, you're right to emphasize the Spanish, they do get Cuba and they get the protection for Cuba. So it's not a bad consolation prize. So yes, so I just want to put it here, the Spanish, also the British, the French, they are thinking globally in terms of all of these places. Americans can they can just concentrate on our 13 states here. But the other powers are thinking, we can trade this Caribbean place for that one in the Mediterranean. We can't get that, so we can have Havana and protect it. They're all different pieces on a much larger board. And the Americans are a part of that, but all those other powers have their own interests that they're playing up to. Yes?
It brings up how, it still goes on today. All the negotiations of who's going to be in power across the country. Not the country, the globe. And it's interesting to me how this little island, though, it just seemed to be always under attack. Always.
Right, it's because the port is pretty good, okay? And it's right on the border between what is claimed, right? There's a river, that's a natural border, and it ends up being the border between British and Spanish, and then American and British, and then American and Spanish. It's really that border where these empires and nations, bump up against each other because of the harbor, because of the natural border at the river that makes Amelia Island important in those stories. Yeah.
No more questions? That's the last chance? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.